Time for another Monte and Wolf show. We got the hype match of T1 versus Dplus Keria. T1 wins, and I would say I watched those matches earlier today on my Bangers Only stream. Pretty convincing fashion, actually. I think probably there was an opportunity for them to win all three games, but they didn't actually pull it out. We'll get into that. We'll get into that though. Gen.G, meanwhile, pulling off another important win versus Hanwha Life, and we've got a ton of other shows happening. So, as part of Last Free Nation, this show is but a star in the majestic constellation of our podcast empire, majestic constellation. And that means that starting this week, we will have Power Spike back for those of you guys who enjoy that. We'll be doing that the day this show is released. We'll be doing it live right after LEC. So as soon as LEC ends, come back to our Twitch channel and you guys will get that live. We've got Summoning Insight this week. We've got Best Damn League show with Dom and Thorn talking about LEC. We've got all of our shows in Counter-Strike that are back up, which you guys probably want to preview if you're a Counter-Strike fan, because I Am Katowice is coming up. So you get to hear all about that in Snake and Banter, Hot Take Point Made, By the Numbers, all the shows over there too. So subscribe everywhere. Follow the YouTube channel, follow the Twitch channel, etc., etc., etc. Follow Proxy Wolf on Twitter for all your hot LCK and now Challenger League updates. Did anything interesting happen in Challenger League this week? Let's start there.
Not that I know of, not really. The first matches of like before LCK this week, we had some games and it was like very standard, boring meta stuff. That's when we realized we really hated Syndra with Zeri. Like they don't work well together, except when the enemy team is weak against Syndra comps. And that was the one thing that I even remember from Challengers. It was a long broadcast for me. I watched all of the games. And we get updates about if anything interesting happens in draft. We usually get told by the production now, like because a lot of the games are not broadcast. So if they see something or they hear about some weird draft, they usually send it to us. There was a crazy play from a Gnar and Yone who set up a 5-man Gnar into 5-man Yone ult. And I was sent a clip of that, and it was amazing. But it was really the other team making mistakes, and the game was already over at that point. But that was cool. But yeah, nothing really interesting in the realm of challengers this week. Except if you count Bulldog, who is a challengers player coming to the LCK, taking Ghost and letting his bottom lane get totally bopped and left out to dry by T1. And then
you mean instead of a teleport?
Yeah, he took Ghost on Victor into set because he wanted to lane bully and then couldn't help his bottom lane when the set dive came through. I don't know if you saw that game because it might not have been a banger by your standards.
No. Not only did I see it, but there is a cut down made by our editor Adanian on my YouTube channel, which you guys can go check out as well. That channel should be starting to get more active again. So it's at GG MonteCristo on YouTube. And that was actually one of the best first 15 minutes of a game of League of Legends I have ever seen. It was very, very fun. So I did some analysis of that. And if you guys missed that, just go check it out on my YouTube channel. And you can also watch the full game if you like. But that was absolutely a banger, Wolf. That was the first game I ever did on my Bangers Only streams, and I was over the moon because it was a fucking fabulous banger. Because here's the thing, bangers can exist when gods punish mere mortals, and that's what happened in that game.
Yeah, that is essentially what happened. That game was really sad. Youngjae was crying after the game, and it was a mess. And Bulldog just stayed mid, and Faker dropped waves and he couldn't come over. He didn't take teleport. If he can teleport, maybe he helps defend, but it's early game Victor anyways, so there's not much he could do in that case. I know you didn't see the second Kwangdong game because nobody watched this series except those most hardcore LCK fans who watched.
Well, I didn't because it happened last night as well. So yeah, I was watching some LEC this morning, and then I watched the first game of HLE versus Gen.G from today. So I will rely on you to regale me with tales of how they lost to DRX.
I will just tell all the fans that the same thing happened basically again, where DRX actually played the double AD bottom lane. Barrow played Caitlyn and pushed the lane, and they were actually messing up the lane like super bad. Barrow's Caitlyn was very bad, but it was very fun because it's Caitlyn support, and they were messing up the lane, and then Fate just did the same thing Faker did and just dropped waves on Sylas and came down, and Bulldog was on Ghost Victor, and he just clearly didn't tell his bot lane this was happening because the Sylas disappeared from the lane, and Bulldog just got turret plates, and then Sylas appeared in the bottom lane twice and actually got kills early. Finished a full Magi's in that game by the end of it, and totally carried the game. So Quantum having some problems defending their bottom turret against AD supports. That continued to happen. But we could talk about the Dplus Kia series with T1 because I think that's the obvious real focal point of the show this week. And this is the first. A lot of people don't like this meta because it's Lucian versus Zarya a lot. Feels very defined. A lot of the game is defined by that bottom 3v3. We don't look at top lane, which is very boring, and nothing really important happens there. Sometimes important things happen, but usually not. But I enjoy this meta because kind of like GOATs in Overwatch, it's super solved. So when you get to see it played at the highest level, you get to see a lot of intricacies of it, and we've seen it so much that we could see like these little minute changes and these cool drafts where we're seeing like Aurelia come back suddenly and things like that. But this is the first series that made me hate the meta because it is so snowbally and so objective based that I feel like we were robbed of a good series because both the first two games were good, quote unquote, and that were close. But it was like in game one, Dplus Kia gets a lead. One bad team fight, lose the lead completely. One clutch team fight at the end, they win the game. I felt like there wasn't a lot of back and forth. There wasn't a lot of macro duels in this series. And then game three was not a game. So
it wasn't. It was not. Okay, let's start with game one though, because the mind games were real in this series, and I do think that we have to discuss what the state of both of these teams was coming in, because that's part of what made this series so fun to watch and so fascinating. So obviously the state was okay. There were two main narratives, and both of them revolved around the bottom lane. On the Dplus Kia side, it was Dplus playing through the bottom lane super heavily and relying on Lucian and Nami. Now, we didn't know. Obviously, it's Deft, so we assume he can play other things, right? But this was a team that had really been dominating with the Lucian and Nami, getting a lot of kills, diving turrets, et cetera, being a massive threat on these champions. Then you have T1. As we stated, well, here comes there was the support Ashe, there was the support Caitlyn. By the end of this series, there was a support Callista from Keria. So these were all champions that were part of the mind games coming in. And so T1 starts on blue side, and we see Caitlyn and Ashe bans on red side from Dplus. They don't want this to happen. And so T1 thinks to themselves, aha, I will take the Lucian Nami and you will be forced to play Yuumi Zeri, thinking that they would have the priority, which is also how T1 has been wanting to play with these like lethality AD carry supports, right? But then something very interesting happened. Then the mind game set inside the game. Because I was watching this game earlier today and I was like, hold up. This fucking Yuumi has Guardian, bone plating, and shield bash. Why is this? Why is this happening? And it turns out that Dplus tried to like judo reverse throw the bot lane dark tech against T1. And so we have a Yuumi who is mostly unattached, using Guardian shields and shield bash and bone plating to basically auto bully the Lucian and the Nami out of lane. And not only that, but stack up, like evolve the support trinket, the support item into what's the tier 2 called? Spell Thief.
You're talking. Oh, I don't know what it's called. It's like Shard of Ice or something.
Well, Shard of True Ice is the top one, but it got to the second. The Spell Thief got to the second evolution by 5 minutes into the game, and it got to Shard of True Ice by 12 minutes into the game. So the whole thing was just completely ridiculous, and it completely fucked up T1's ability to play the game because they couldn't push in bot side.
Well, this
which
was
was
just
funny.
this is Kellen basically saying like I saw Freak's patch notes about what they took Yumi's like autos away. Basically, like I've been joking that Yumi's a melee champion now, thanks to Freak. But Kellen was like, one last ride, let's use those Yumi autos. Let's push this lane, and they traded really well. And Def basically showcased, I think, in this game how well he understands so many of the meta matchups. And like obviously a lot of this is Kellen as well, but they played it super well in the early parts of that game, and it looked really good for Dplus Keria. And also, some of the stuff we've been seeing in the bottom lane for T1 has been just really shaky play from Guma Keria. I wasn't casting this game, but I was doing the analysis for it on the desk, carpet space, whatever we call it, with Valdez, and we were watching it, and we were like, Guma seems to be a little bit off recently, and we were watching and kind of focusing on zooming in on it, and I think Dplus Keria kind of identified they think this lane is basically free. We're gonna have this weird, unique style of play with Yumi, and we're gonna catch them off guard, and it worked really well. And just overall, I think that the way Dplus Keria played around objectives this game was really smart, and the Talia pick ended up being massive for them, and
Yeah.
part of why they stole the game back is because of it. But it was really interesting. That first game, I liked how Dplus Keria played it, but they also overstepped their boundaries on that Drake fight in the mid game and lost control, and T1 got full control back, and it was very much a three-part game. Dom1 Keria gets a lead, Dom1 Keria loses a lead, or Dplus Keria loses a lead, and then have to take it back at the end. So
Well, I think part of the problem, and like watching that game, is that Dplus lost. Basically, the Talia pick, they picked Talia last on the red side, which was very smart because it really does nullify a lot. I mean, it hurts Lucian, hurts Azir once you have the Talia E down, and it especially hurts the Wukong engage because you basically have to E, or you have to E yourself, dash through the Talia E in order to engage. But the problem was that the dragon fight that you're talking about, where they kind of threw, they basically just let Owner come in on Wukong for free and kind of whiffed a gnarled. And they really needed just to they were trying to like kill Gumayushi, but like that didn't matter because he was so weak because of the early game. And Kana really just didn't do his job, and Showmaker didn't do his job of peeling for this Yumi. And that allowed Owner and Zeus on Yone just to get on top of Yumi for free. So there was a throw, but I think that was a pretty bad lack of identification of win conditions that we saw from Dplus. And I think what was true about this entire series is T1, just as they did last year, had excellent identification of win conditions, and Dplus lost sight of that.
the Baron fight in that first game, that where Dplus got it back with a really cool play from Deft, where he timed the blast and he was able to avoid the Yone ult because he was positioned just to the right of where Zeus wanted to ult out to block the smite from Canyon coming through with Deft's damage, was actually really cleanly played. And like on some levels, I think that both the play from Zeus with the Yone ult out of the pit was extremely smart and very calculated,
Yep.
but also not the right choice. Like, because on some level you're like, okay, if I ult this, I probably push them away and we guarantee we get the Baron, right? That's the idea with this play. But if you use your ultimate that way, lose the Baron because unfortunately, like, their positioning was too good and they had a plan, then you don't have your ultimate when they collapse in and try to win the fight. And so he doesn't have ult. There's no way for T1 to win that fight. And it's like both exactly the right move, but also like unfortunately why they lost the game.
I talked about this when I was doing my stream, because like I actually don't think T1 made a mistake there. To your point, so if you guys to refresh your memory, what happened was there was a huge as a result of that dragon fight, there was like a 7,000 gold swing where T1 gets a massive lead, and then they are trying to eventually do this Baron. And you see Canyon, who's playing Sejuani, coming in, and they're playing on red side, so they have to go over the back wall of the pit in order to get there. And Zeus is using his Yone tether to attack them on the back side of the pit, and he's trying to ult Sejuani so that Sejuani can't get into the pit. But what happens is Canyon ults him first, and then the real brilliance of this was just an incredible play by Canyon, where the Zeri laser is activating. He sees that. He flashes the wall at 1300 HP, smites it at the same time the Zeri laser deals its damage, because it takes time to like spin up, right? There's a moment in time
Animation, yeah.
for the animation. And so he actually manages to combine it at the point where his 1200 damage smite and the Zeri laser will kill it at the same time. It is an insane play by Canyon.
It's
And I
amazing.
don't
And Deft also doesn't get caught, which like Deft is positioned so far back that he can't be caught by the Yone. Because if he gets caught, the play is impossible. But he actually is positioned so well. Like they played that together so well.
So I'm hesitant to say that I think it was a big mistake from T1, because I think T1 had the right read on that situation. They had a substantial enough gold lead that I don't think they thought the danger was as great as it was. And I think it's just one of those things where you just have to tip your hat to Canyon and say, this guy is he's really fucking good.
Yeah, it was like I said, it was exactly the right play from T1, but ultimately they lost because of it, because the other team was so good. So it was like the wrong choice if we can go back in time, like in hindsight. But I think
Yeah.
it was an amazing play on both sides. Like that one part of the game, because T1's setup for the Baron was good. They were clean, they were fast, etc. Zeus's play is brilliant for what he's trying to do to deny the smite. That was the best part of that first game to me, because all this the dark tech, as you called it, in the bottom lane, and the stuff that happened before that was really just kind of early lead, toss a lead, go back to Baron. But that one kind of saved the game for me in terms of like the hype that we wanted from this series. Because just to remind everyone too, who might not have known the stakes of this or didn't watch the game, this basically determines first place, because both of these teams are so much higher than any of the other teams in the LCK right now. They're like a whole tier above Gen.G, in my opinion. I think most people would agree. Like Gen.G looks a little bit shaky, still a very strong team, but nowhere near T1 or Dplus. And so whoever wins this game is likely going to like win regular season, because it seems like no team is going to be able to catch up to either of these teams at any time soon. And maybe the first time T1's going to take a loss now might be when they play against Dplus Kia a second time
Right.
in the second round robin. So T1 winning this actually means a lot, because it is really important for getting first place, having that extra seeding advantage going into playoffs and stuff like that. Because unless something crazy happens, we see a big turnaround from Gen.G or Hanwha Life, doesn't look like any team's coming close to either of these right now.
Well, also
So
T1 has already beaten Gen.G, importantly.
yes, with a 2-0 score, a very one-sided match in the beginning of the season. So they already have that sick lead too. So this matchup is really important, and like it felt like it was going to be insanely hype, and some aspects of it delivered. I think, and T1 looked really clean.
Yeah, but you would have said, I think most people would have said that T1 is the favorite going into this series, because they have a crazy good advantage because they kept their roster from last season. Like, this is a known synergy, and even though Dplus had looked good last week, they were playing, I mean, their first three opponents were DRX, Live Sandbox, and Nongshim Red Force, right? This was their first real game, and they dominated their matchups and made it look very easy. So you couldn't have asked more from them in terms of just shitting on people, but we didn't know exactly how deep they were, because they were mostly doing it in the same fashion with Lucian and Nami, and they hadn't played a good opponent. But I think this series really lived up to the billing. I think that game one was just a phenomenal game it was very back and forth, super interesting, unique choices were made regarding strategies heading into the game, pick ban heading into the game. And then ultimately some really big plays were made that I think the first dragon fight was Dplus making mistakes. I think the Baron steal was just an insane play by Canyon. Like, I think T1 really didn't do much wrong there.
Yeah, game two, I have like very foggy memories on. I just remember Faker having an amazing game of his year. And it was like a clean T1 game, and it didn't feel like in my memory, because obviously, guys, I've cast so many games and watched so many games this week that like this game didn't stand out to me in particular. Game one and game three did. But I do remember Faker having a really good game on Azir that time, and it felt one sided to me the whole time. It felt like T1 had control throughout the entirety of game two. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it before we talk about game three, because game three
Yeah,
is the one I want to talk about.
I think quickly, they Gumayushi and Keria did better in the second game. They played against the Yumi Zeri again, but they had a little bit more attention from owner and the bot side this time, so it made it easier for them. I do think that Deft had a very good game, and this was back and forth. But ultimately, for those of you who have been watching a bunch of the LCS Jax K'Sante matchups and wondering why Jax keeps getting picked into K'Sante, it's because of games like this. I mean, the split push threat was crazy. Jax is a lot better in team fights than K'Sante is, especially in like front to back team fights in the late game. And you see kind of the scaling advantage both in splitting and in team fights that Jax can get. And at the end of the day, I think for me, Dplus had a good early lead, but they are not very good at lane assignments. They dropped a lot of farm, and Zeus was able to put a ton of split push pressure on, and they didn't do very good lane assignments to pick up farm. And so you still see how this team is like struggling a little bit with sometimes identifying their win conditions, which almost lost them the first game of the series. And in this game, they just weren't coordinated enough about who was going where. And T1 is just so clean when it comes to these kind of decisions that over a long series like a best of 3 or even a best of 5, it just becomes more and more difficult to beat them if you're not up to standard. And
Now,
kind of
yeah,
kind of kind
now
of kind of is the weak link on this team. Yeah, I would say after watching this series.
I think in some ways, yeah, and I think he's still developing with this roster. He had a really great start to the season, and I really was a believer, and I still am, but I guess I'm not as high on him as I was before after this series. But I mean, we're being very nitpicky because this is the S tier versus S tier matchup, right? Like this is the one we have to be like nitpicky on, and people are like, "Well, you guys don't think they're good." I'm like, "No, they are the actually we have to hold them to a really high standard because this is the T1 Dplus series, right?"
The reason why we're going into this, and people be like, "Oh yeah, you guys are saying Dplus sucks or T1 sucks." No, these are probably the two best teams in the world right now. But
Yeah.
we really have to go deep to say like, was this a bad strategic choice or a crazy outplay? Who is the weak link on this team if there had to be one? Because they have looked extremely strong.
Yeah. And like I saw someone in Twitch chat earlier because we do this show live now. So if you're watching on YouTube, come watch it live on Inside on Esports on Twitch. But someone was mentioning, I said I feel like Guma is looking a little off right now, and someone was like, "But Guma's so great. Like he looked super good in the series." Yeah, he did, but I mean compared to like where his peak is, I feel like Guma didn't play. He played like maybe like a 90 out of 100 in this series. I felt like of his potential, right? So like these are the like minute things we're
will
talking
always
about.
get you, Wolf. They'll always get you.
They will.
It's like
And I love them.
you don't bow down and kiss their feet. You may be implied that they have some level of flaw, and that's when the trucks start coming, Wolf. They're outside your
So
apartment right now.
so yeah, they're coming for me. I do remember actually in this game, now that we've talked about it a little bit, the final Baron fight, if I'm not mistaken, was when it almost could have been Deft pops off and then
Yep.
he gets counterstruck by Zeus's Jax. And like
Yep.
that's actually the game winning moment. Because it looked
So
like, oh, like maybe Dplus win this fight and like this game could go on, and then no.
So
Jax gets on.
the problem was is that he no longer had stopwatch because he used it to win the previous fight. And so they almost came back, but he didn't have flash or stopwatch in the final Baron fight. So it's kind of, it was hard for him to not get hit by Jack's Counter-Strike. But yeah. I think if we talk about the third game, what did you want to say about that? Because that's when the support Callista comes out.
So the third game is really interesting because it's the support Callisto, right? And it's the Draven lane, and Deft and Kellen played it out very well early. They wanted to skirmish early and like deal with that. And you have a Ryze, right? So Ryze should have perma prio and level 6, so he should be able to defend this lane, which is basically a non-stop pushing all-in lane because you have Callista Draven. It's so much damage. You're playing the Zeri Lulu, so you can't really stave off the pressure very well. In theory, like the draft is amazing for T1. I've already seen the Caitlyn support from Keria. This player is once again just kind of redefining the meta on support in a completely different way, again, as he always does. Now with these double AD lanes, which we're seeing other teams pick up now too. So T1 has kind of inspired this whole new concept of play in the LCK. And I looked at the drafts and I thought, okay, this is a really cool concept, but there's a Ryze mid against Caston who should have perma prio, and Showmaker did. And he should be able to realm warp and defend that bottom lane. So there's like a timer on how much pressure you can get done with this Kalista Draven lane. And I thought the Graves pick was amazing for this too, because you basically want to win this war of attrition and damage in that lane when they're trying to all-in you. You have that extra Graves damage. You don't want the CC as much necessarily, and it shores up a lot of your damage problems later on in the game too. I really like the Graves pick. And everything about the way this was handled in draft for Dplus, I really liked. And I was like, okay, with Ryze here, they should be okay. I thought the Kassadin, I looked at that draft and I thought, Kassadin might be a big mistake here because, yeah, you have late game with this. You have a lot of power with the Kalista. You can take Baron fights really well. You basically have a second smite. You have this insane power in team fights and lanes. You have the Fates Call. So there's too many threats like the Kassadin in the late game. Do you kill him? Do you focus the Draven? Do you focus the Kalista? Like, who do you kill in a fight? It's very complex, like how the target selection has to go for Dplus Keria. But if they actually stave off the pressure with this Ryze pick, with the perma prio they have mid, the Graves pick they picked, which was smart, and if he shadows the bottom side, this could be shut down, right? And then Owner shows up in the mid lane when Showmaker's level 5, and he doesn't have phase rush. He loses his whole health bar, can't get level 6, already lost teleport. Owner knows all these things. Like, he sees this opportunity. He knows, okay, we could hit 6. We're going to fight bottom side. We're going to all in. That's what this lane's going to do. And he comes over and does this to Showmaker, and Showmaker cannot defend the bottom side of the map. He loses control of the lane, and everything I just talked about how Showmaker should be able to help keep this bottom lane alive when the all-ins are coming, just all gets thrown out the window. And he took Conqueror, which is...
Baker gets a triple kill on Kassadin.
Yeah, he gets a triple kill, and the game is over. And we're like, okay, that's it. Like, it's done. It's over. And that was the saddest part of Game 3. I was like, I was promised a Game 3. I was promised an exciting series.
So,
and then Owner said no.
I have a slightly different take on this. Like, yes, it was over when the Kassadin gets a triple kill at level 6. But the cool thing about what happened is that, again, you see this back and forth because Dplus sees the Draven, and Canyon gets red buff, level 2 ganks, first blood onto Deft on Zeri, right? So it looks like it's going great. But what T1 does, and this is a testament to how good T1 is right now, is that they push Ryze out of lane and they turn that into the game, right? That is very impressive that they were gimped in bot lane, and they do have a very good matchup. And I do think the Ornn pick is pretty useless in this draft. So there were other problems for Dplus, but they should have had a stronger 2v2 in Graves. They should have had a lot of mid control with Graves and Ryze versus Kassadin and Sejuani. But because Showmaker steps up too far, which there was no reason for him to do because he wasn't going to get any damage down on a Kassadin, the wave was pushed into the turret. He literally just walked up to the turret to, like, I guess, zone Faker off 3 caster minions, which was not useful, with no vision. So he gets chunked out, has to recall. Faker hits 6 off of that play. Owner and Faker walk bot. That's when they get a triple kill because Canyon's there. Canyon also overextends to kill Gumayushi, which is another problem. So there was a series of cascading problems where it looked like Canyon wasn't communicating with Showmaker or with his bot lane about what should have been possible. But to take that one mistake and turn it into just this incredible snowball to win this game goes to show how scary T1 is. Like, yeah, there are very, 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 very little room for error when you play against this team.
They just take these small edges, and I mean, the game against Kwangdong where they played the set and just constantly dove with the Caitlyn push was just another one of these same types of games, right? Like, where you're just going, all right, I'm going to dive repeatedly, I'm going to get a bunch of kills, I'm going to push, and I'm going to take the whole map. And then they did it again in the second game in that Kwangdong series where Kwangdong tried to do some like lane swaps and try to kind of trick T1 and be like, oh yeah, well, you're going to push bottom really hard, we're going to push top really hard. They handled that really well. They have such an innate understanding of all these weird different scenarios. I think part of this comes from the fact that Faker has lived through every meta of all time. Like, he's lived through the old lane swap meta. He's lived through the funnel meta. Like, he knows everything so well because he's played hundreds of professional games where he's seen all these small, minute things, and all these players trust him, and they're all on the same page. They're all mechanically gifted. So, like you said, one mistake can be the entire game. And like, Canyon was, if I remember this correctly, I think he even like flashed in for the kill. Like, it was just it.
It was too
I don't
much.
want to. I don't want to give T1 like this insane credit, like everything was perfect, because I don't think this was a bait. But the way that they pulled back and Canyon overextends and flashes forward is like, it's just like the cherry on top. Well, Faker just appears out of nowhere like an anime,
Yep.
and he's like, "This is my final move," and he just
You
jumps
activated
out with
my
his
prep
old.
card.
Yeah, it was just like it's like Faker teleports behind you. Nothing personal, kid. It's one of those moments where you're just like, holy
Yeah.
shit! Like everything
No,
goes so well, and your jaw hits the floor, and you're like, it's
I get
over.
it. I get it, man. I get it. When you see the Draven in the bot side, you get really horny to kill him. You get so horny because the whole thing is like you're sitting there and you're just like, oh my god, they're gonna play through this bot lane. You know, we got this mid lane shit on lock right now, at least for the early game with this Rise. Like Rise is gonna scale too. It's okay, guys. If we just shut down the Draven, if we just prevent him from cashing in those stacks, then we'll be fine. And so you get so horny that you just forget yourself, and like you forget that you can just push them out of lane, because they had every opportunity just to push them out of lane and just leave before the casting came. They didn't respect it. Showmaker may not have communicated like the game state properly. Who knows? But yeah, they got too horny for the Draven. He's very sexy, I get it, but you can't get that horny and just blow your load all on the Draven, because then you got no load for everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there was some communication problems in that moment. And this is why, even though a lot of people saw how great Damwon were in scrims, and a lot of people were talking about like, oh, maybe this team could be better than T1, and I did predict Dplus, and I keep calling them Damwon today, but I predicted Dplus to win this series because I thought they looked more dominant, because I think Deft's bottom 2v2s are by far the best in the league. I think T1 has a lot more complexity to theirs, and they have a lot more playstyles they've shown. Like, they've shown a broader picture of their understanding of the meta, but I think on the opposite side, I thought Deft had the cleanest read on the specific Zeri Lucian meta, like that mini meta that we're living in. T1 have obviously shown us there's a lot more actually to this patch, and there's a lot of other ideas. But that was why I had faith in Dplus Kia. But I did predict T1 to win regular season, to win the season before knowing anything about Dplus outside of some scrim data and stuff that I had looked into. But because the roster has that synergy from playing together and playing at Worlds together and playing on Worlds final stage together, MSI, all of this stuff. These are the moments where one small mistake for Dplus, and then they still overextend bottom side, and there's all these other problems because they're still new together, right? Like, this team has not played here. Showmaker, Canyon obviously have that synergy, but bottom side of the map, there's still some improvements to be made with Def joining the team, Kana coming in, and just one small error like that, one small overextension, because the play is savable if they just back off, and they might lose one player, but Faker doesn't get a triple, and the game is still playable. But when you overextend like that, the game becomes unplayable, right? And I do think that Dplus has nowhere to go but up from here, and their starting point is still so good that I think I'm really excited for the T1 Dplus Kia finals later on this year.
It does feel inevitable, doesn't it? It does feel it does feel like it is almost inconceivable that we could see a not T1 versus Dplus final with how these teams are playing. Because like you said, we know T1 has it's what made this matchup not good last year, which is that the problem with Damwon last year was that they would play wacky shit, but they didn't really know how to use it themselves. And T1, they will read your team comp better than you will, right? That's what happened in that game 5 in summer when the Heimerdinger came out, right? It was a good strat on paper from Damwon, but they actually were worse at using it than T1 was at reading how to beat it. And that is the same power that T1 has right now. Now, I think that this iteration of Dplus is better than last year's Damwon, right? I think they have more versatility, more strength through the bot lane with Deft there. I think they have a clearer idea of how they want to play, with Kana being more of a weak side top laner than having Nuguri, who is really hit or miss, and kind of made the game states pretty weird at times because he would just like int. Whereas Kana's more of a known quantity, even if perhaps he has less upside, right? So I think Dplus is going to be in a good situation. And indeed, their shot calling already looks a lot better than it did last year. But T1 still has that same ability to like scan you and figure you out and deconstruct you on the fly. And so in a way, you have to outplay them, which is what we saw Canyon doing at times within this series. And I think if you're D plus, like you're saying, there's only you can only go up because you look at these games and it's pretty clear what you did wrong. And these are things that are fixable problems.
Yeah, and what's so interesting to me is if you look back at summer for 2022, you and I were really high on Damwon Kia going to Worlds because we were like, okay, this team is experimenting a lot. Canada was playing all these off-meta picks, and they were playing these strategies that were clearly smart and ahead of their time, like the Karthus jungle we saw from him in that Gen.G series last summer. And this is going a little bit back in time, but rules have swapped quite significantly here because I think at the end of summer, we were like, okay, T1 has honed in on what the meta is and they're perfecting it. And Damwon Kia is experimenting and they're going to have a better read going into Worlds. That's kind of what we thought. And now that T1 has that pre-existing synergy and they're the dominant team, it's reversed where T1 has a really good read on this meta in a different way, but they're also very experimental and trying really cool stuff with what they're doing in these games with the support AD carry stuff that they're doing. Faker on the Kassadin pick here, how they utilize that pressure in mid. They're very good, but also slightly experimental. But Dplus Kia, now with this new roster, a little bit less experimental, a little bit more zoomed in on exactly what this meta is right now. And so the identities have completely changed here. I think when it comes to summer, it might swap completely again as Dplus Kia get more used to this roster. They become more experimental again with their coaching staff that loves to do new draft ideas in summer season. And then we'll see T1, I think, really laser focus on what the summer meta is going into Worlds, because that's just how the coaching staff that, it's basically Faker, but he has a team of people around him. That's clearly what their goal was going into the end of summer season, which led to all the way to the Worlds finals. So I'm looking forward to seeing like how these two teams continue to collide against each other. Because I do like what you said about how like Dplus Kia, their errors here are fixable, and yet still they almost just said like, "Fuck you, I'm gonna skill check you and beat you," like, and it almost worked,
It was a very
like,
close series. I mean, they could have won. They had opportunities. I don't think they had opportunities to win all 3 games, realistically. Like, I think they did. The level 2 Canyon gang put them in an okay position in the first game in the series, or the third game of the series, even though that was like a 25-minute blowout by the end because they made a titanic mistake. At least at the start, there was an opportunity. So, I mean, I love what I saw. It was an extremely good series overall, and probably any League of Legends fan should be watching that because as it stands right now, especially because LPL, a lot of the LPL teams started a bit shaky, and it's very early in the season, and they've been on break for the Lunar New Year. At least, when LPL comes back, maybe we're going to see, as a result of that break, maybe some better synergy. But a lot of the LPL teams are still working on developing synergy themselves. So even though many of these teams have high ceilings over there, they haven't shown as much coordination as we've seen from a team like T1 or even D plus, right? So it's good.
So before we talk about Hanwha, because I think we have to talk a little bit about Hanwha this
Yep.
week because there was some growth there. I want to talk about this 80 carry meta that we're in right now, and will it change on 13.1b? So it's been like publicly announced. We talked about this on the show, the LCK show, but 13.1b is delayed by an extra week. Riot has all these problems with their patches and stuff right now because of the security breach, and so we have this hotfix patch. But because the hotfix patch came out very late, the players wanted an extra week in the LCK to prepare. So I know you're laughing about security breach stuff, and it's very
super
fun.
funny.
Um,
No, it's just the concept that the hackers are trying to ransom League of Legends garbage code is just objectively super funny.
it is pretty funny. It is pretty funny.
They stole some garbage, and then they're just like, "This garbage is worth $10 million." You're like, "Is it? Is it worth $10 million? Can you like fix it up a little bit for us? And then we'll pay you
Send it
10 million
back.
for it."
Yeah. So that's the reason why this patch is delayed. And we are seeing all sorts of like weird and crazy stuff now that 13B is out there, and like people are talking about building Infinity Edge first and all sorts of crazy builds and getting the last part of that 40% crit. I've been calling it the Freak Edge now because it doesn't feel like it's the Infinity Edge. It's his take. Side note, I love what Freak has done when he stepped into this role. Like, he has been super transparent about what they're doing. He's making a lot of really big changes and explaining them really well and being ready to take criticism as well. That's another topic for another time, but big ups to Freak. So this meta right now, I don't know if the 13B patch will change it, because I think this meta is a product of teams realizing how strong bottom 2v2 push is. That's why Varus is back in the meta. That's why these Varus, Ashe, these Heimerdinger lanes are popping up. Karma's back. Everyone's like, wow, if you can just push a lane in and on that first big wave, just dive and kill the scaling AD carry opponent over and over again, you can snowball the game. It's a snowballing meta.
Elise this year too, which makes it very easy to dive, or Vi, or some of these other champs, right?
So all these meta diving champs are making this even stronger. And now we're seeing Caitlyn support and Kalista support, which it's almost like a misnomer, because it creates this idea like, wow, there's so much utility in Caitlyn's kit. I love when she puts the traps down. It's like, no, it's just 280 carries pushing a lane.
I mean,
and then and Umbroglaive is broken, so
Umbroglaive is too good.
Umbroglaive is so broken, and without that item, I don't think this even is viable. But it's so broken.
It's not.
So you have like this lethality, which is good for pushing against the squishy 80 carry on the other side. And this is actually so broken right now in the LCK. I think the LCK is figuring this out. Like, every region figured out, like, oh, Lucian Nami, you push it really hard. And then people last season were like, maybe Draven also works. Kallista's really good. Like, pushing the turret is really strong. And now we figure this out. But Keria basically has taken this to the next level. And this might actually become a problem that Riot needs to fix, I think. It is a problem. We're getting to this point where, like, literally everything is viable as support if you could just push the turret in and do a ton of damage and then dive repeatedly. I just want to talk about this because I think this could be a big issue and not enough people are talking about it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm glad we're chatting about this, because if you think about AD carry kits, right? A lot of them, how can I put this? Because they are designed to output damage via auto attacks, right? Or via skill shots. If you are a mechanically gifted player, right, you can't add too many other abilities to their kits that do damage, because their primary purpose is to do it through autos, right? So what happens is you start to add other things to their kits. And those other things happen to be Caitlyn traps, which are very good at zoning and you can't clear without stepping on them. So you just get free zone control, right? And that's obviously wonderful for a support. You get things like Callista Sentinels, so you get more vision control and ability. You get things like Rend, which just allow you to,
which allows her to save the AD carry at any time and then turn him into a bomb.
Turn into a bomb, which, by the way, doesn't put the AD carry next to somebody. It hits them, knocks them up, and then puts them at max range of their auto attack. So it's not actually that bad to throw your AD carry at people, especially towards the end of a fight. When Draven can just ult a cluster of people that you just knocked up. In the case of Ashe, you just have conditional engage from infinite distance away, and you have perpetual slows and AoE slows. So it's a lot of, you can see why this is good. And I think, to Wolf's point, Umbroglaive is ridiculous, because so much of this game is either pushing in via lethality, or it's about fighting at 6 or 11 minutes for dragons, or at 8 minutes for a herald. Nobody has armor at this point in time, guys. Nobody has armor. So you have a serrated Dirk and other lethality items, and you just poke. You just poke because you have an extra long range poke champion.
And then you take the control that you already presumably have with this all-in AD carry push lane. And you have,
we didn't even talk about that, but yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing entirely. But you have the Umbroglaive, so you're like, I'm winning, we dove, we killed the turret, we have this oppressive lead now, and you can't get vision, because that's right, the support can one-shot wards basically and zoom around the map, and you have these insane ward scores that are like 150 in these games where people are just killing wards just non-stop because they have a sweeper and they have an Umbroglaive. You can't get vision, and these lethality champions keep just popping out and blowing you up, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's an easy build. It's just, this is actually insanely broken right now, and it feels like LCK has a faster read on it than everyone else. Like everyone else has kind of figured out, like, wow, the push is strong. That's good.
You need a support player that has hands is also part of the problem, and many support players. Well, actually, you don't because Beryl just played it. So I retract my statement.
Do a great job, but it still worked, despite him. But the the LCK is now sort of adopting this, right? We did see Beryl play it. I think this next week we're going to see it a lot. So I'm bringing this up in the context of, yes, this is potentially broken for the game, but also in the context of LCK. I think we are going to see this a lot next week. It's definitely something to keep an eye on. Yep. And I guarantee you, 100%, the LPL had this week off, watch these games, and they've
probably been scrimming against this.
It is common. It's going to be I guarantee you it's going to be an LPL, sure. And it's going to be oppressive. And this is like one of those things where I'm like, guys, this is an issue? Like, has anyone noticed this is suddenly like really broken and strong? Because Caitlyn is already basically permabanned in every game, but now the drafts have moved into like, okay, we have to ban Maokai. Are we banning the Lucian? Like, what lanes are we playing? I have to worry about the Heimerdinger. There's also this Varus problem. Like, there's too much to ban, so this Caitlyn just sometimes slips through. But it's not just the Caitlyn. There's the Varus, Ashe lane, very similar situations. Ashe just builds Umberglaive. Wow, it's the same problem, just a different champion. I think I'm hoping that some of the changes in 13.1b might fix this, but they really don't directly address this issue at all. So I think like this could even be stronger on 13.1b as people figure this out. So
I mean, it also
we'll see.
It arguably the thing that the changes to IE and Navori quick blades do is that we think it will probably increase the 2-item power spike, right? And so what that means is I hope you guys like Lucian and Caitlyn. And you know what else likes Lucian and Caitlyn? Oh yeah, laning with these lethality, especially Caitlyn, right? Laning with these lethality supports, because it actually just makes it so the early game power spike is even stronger because you had it strong with the support. And now it's increasing the power potentially of those ADCs at 15 minutes into the game, 18 minutes into the game.
And even like a Karma, we've seen Karma, people are like, okay, we can Karma this or Heimerdinger this because we can just try to wave clear and deal with it and we're going to be fine, right? It just doesn't, it works better than just a like Zeri Lulu lane where you're doomed, it's hopeless, but it doesn't work that well and it's been struggling. So we can move on and talk about Hanwha Life now, but I really just wanted to bring this up because I think, I'm not trying to be like a hipster, like I saw it first before anybody kind of thing here, but it's coming, guys. I do not think this is a fluke. And everyone was like, Keria is crazy. I'm like, actually, he's just smarter than everyone else, and he's faster than everyone else to do this. And this is actually like a virus that's going to spread. I feel like this is the Keria playing this Caitlyn Sports like the first zombie. And I'm like trying to warn people. I'm like, this is the zombie apocalypse is coming. Like,
everybody's like, nah, it's fine. In 2 weeks, by the way, that's when the nukes are going to start flying and the military helicopters are going to be everywhere, and you're going to have to kill your friends. So just be aware. You are in fact going. If you guys are in solo queue, I'm sorry, you're going to have to put down your support. That's what it's coming to. That's what it's coming to. It's a mercy killing.
And solo queue is going to be ruined for everyone, and it already is. I played a bunch of solo queue the next day on the Korean server, and I watched a bunch of streams, and it's all Caitlyn support all the time. But let's talk about Hanwha and Clid specifically, because I know you were watching, because I was watching your stream right before this, your Bangers Only stream, and I know you got to see the first game of that Hanwha series.
And I saw the other Hanwha games versus KT as well.
The first series for Hanwha was depressing because it was just really not clean and at all, and KT just kind of bopped him, and it looked hopeless, and there was like no coordination, and that was the moment for me at the beginning of this week where I was like, Hanwha might be like the 6th or 7th place team. Like that might actually be our reality, because it's kind of, we've been kind of hinting at it, we're kind of joking about it a little bit, like, man, like they'll get it together, right? But right now it's looking bad. And then the KT series happened, I was like, I don't think they're going to get it together. And then
they did get absolute shit on, guys, by KT. If you didn't watch it, Hanwha got 2 kills in 2 games. Not each. They got 1 kill in each game of the games. It was incredibly one-sided. They did nothing they did nothing the whole series. There's not a lot to report there.
So everyone was talking about Clid before this, and I looked up his stats, and he has both the highest percentage of deaths before this Gen.G series, so before the games that happened yesterday. So he had both the highest percentage of deaths on the team of any jungler, and also the lowest kill participation of any jungler in the LCK. So he's both dying all the time, but getting nothing for it, essentially. And this is what everyone has been talking about, is like Clid's been struggling. He's had some big, question mark ping moments, definitely in terms of some 1v1s. There was that time he got killed by the Wukong, which was
but the
really
Willow
bizarre.
just randomly just walked in and killed him, and he just didn't do anything.
That was really bizarre. There have been some question mark moments, and most of it I think has been about his decision making. And even in the game that you just watched, because it's on the top of my head because I just watched you watch it again. He often was away from his team at the end of that game one, and like was off trying to do weird stuff and trying to set up for plays where the team was not even there. He's like throwing an ult in, and he's like, "Oh, my team's like clearing waves on the top side of the map because we're about to lose this game." Like there was some bizarre decisions there. But in games 2 and 3, he played Vi in game 2, had a very good game, was really decisive on the Vi, and I didn't even like Vi for that draft in game 2, and he's playing this. It looks like, I don't remember the exact draft, but it looks like, okay, this pick is very risky. If you fall behind, as I expected Hanwha would, this is going to be worthless. They actually win it. And then in game 3 is the really interesting one. So this draft, I have it up because I want to talk about this. And he plays Sejuani, which he is winless on, and I'm worried. But then they draft this Varus Ashe bottom lane, and they have the Kassadin mid for Zeka. And they have a lot of pressure bottom side, so this is kind of equaled out by this Kassadin mid. We saw Clid doing almost exactly the same play that Owner did in the mid lane to Chovy, saying, "Okay, I'm gonna get you to pull back. I'm just gonna shadow nonstop this bottom lane so they can actually get that pressure done. Clid basically is camping between bottom and mid. We're gonna keep that bottom push going. We're gonna control the lanes, and also make sure Zeka's safe because he's playing Kassadin early game. There can be problems. Chovy can kill him." And Clid he walked that line so perfectly. His decision making was great in that game. And then there were problems in the mid game when he made some mistakes and they lost the game. But it was a really good draft. And I think that Hanwha Life, for the first time in this Gen.G series, showed signs of real coordination and planning and good drafting. And I think Clid showed massive improvement in that series. And it, for the first time, actually gave me hope. Like, wow, Hanwha showed some little pieces, some little like shimmers, a little ray of sunlight like went through the clouds of, oh yeah, this is a super team. They do have 3 world champions on this roster. Maybe Clid's not completely washed, right? Like there was a moment where I was like, oh, and then they lost the series, but they almost won, and like this makes me feel like they should be able to beat KT next time they meet. They should not lose to Live Sandbox again if like this trajectory continues. So last week I was super low on Hanwha. In the middle of this week after the KT, I was even lower. But I'm actually like ending this week on a high note for Hanwha. I think it was a good.
I feel like this is going to be the Hanwha Life roller coaster, and I guess I mean, I think the problem, Zeka has been consistently, well, he kind of had some, at least the first game, his Victor play was like pretty bad actually on an individual level. But for most of the series, Zeka hasn't been the primary issue. In fact, he's probably been overall the top performer on this roster. But it really just feels like they have no idea about their identity and how they want to play the game, because a lot of times what happens is one player flashes in or goes in, the other player goes out, and they don't have very good team fighting or a concept around that. I will say to Clid's credit that he often does secure objectives in the early game and make them competitive. So he might die, but he is getting like a decent amount for a team that is losing, right? Remember, they have lost most of their games. So for a team that is losing, they often have some pretty substantial advantages. Like they were up 2-0 in terms of Drakes in the first game against Gen.G. And a lot of that was because Clid was cross mapping on objectives pretty well. So this team really, I think, does need some time to come together. I refuse to believe that Viper is not going to step up at some point and be the superstar player that he knows he can be, but they need to agree on a method that they are going to play the game of League of Legends and where they want to focus their attention, because right now it just feels incredibly scattered.
One of the things, like Viper, this is a really good meta for Viper because he's always been incredible at pushing lanes in the bottom 2v2. Like that's his kind of like whole brand in existence. And like he was so dominant at it that he had like that sick walkout moment in the OGN intro when it was his first season, right? Like it's like, holy shit, this is the Griffin guy everyone is talking about, right? And he was so famous at that time. Like if you think about how the LCK is now and some of the, you know, more recent players who have joined the LCK, like no one has really lived up to like Viper's hype entrance as like a new rising AD carry. Like Pays joined pretty hyped, I guess, like for the fact that we don't have that many new rising talent for AD carry this season. We have Taeyun, who's also like not that great at the moment, and like we're like, oh yeah, we've seen him before, he's okay. But comparing like Pays' entry to Viper's is like just not even comparable, right? Viper when he joined the LCK was the most hyped AD carry joined in a long time, and he played a lot of Varus. He's very good at Varus. He's done crazy stuff like play Teemo in the bottom lane. He loves these pushing lanes. He likes to dominate the lane. He's been doing a good job of it. His laning stats actually, though, you know, I looked this up earlier today too, like third lowest in the LCK, but I think a lot of that is because Clid hasn't shouted him well. He played the 2v2 well, but then he got punished because Clid wasn't there or whatever. There were a lot of problems in the early parts of the season for him. But it should be a meta that's good for him. My issue is not on the bottom side, and it actually goes back to Kingen is playing a middling game right now. Like he's not bad, but he's not great. Clid can't help him. He can't help Viper. Like seems like Clid's getting better, right? But the issue has been that Clid hasn't been able to empower Kingen, so Kingen's often just been snowballed onto. Viper's been dunked on, and Clid hasn't been able to figure out where the pressure is on the map. And then Zeka is being forced to play champions that aren't Akali because teams just banned it against him. Like, well, I'm not gonna let you carry on Akali. Sorry, like you have to play a control mage. And he's like, shit, this is. He's like, but I just won Worlds with Akali, and I won LCK Player of the Year, and I was playing that Akali champion that was really good, and people didn't ban it against me. I kept winning. I think Zeka's kind of been exposed a little bit in that yes, he will carry a game even on a control mage sometimes, but he hasn't found the consistency yet on like Victor. His Talia was really good in game 2 of that Gen.G series, but still figuring out how to like not be an Akali one trick. His Azir also improved a lot, to be fair. Like his Azir improved a lot
It's
during
still
Worlds.
not great.
It improved a lot.
Amazing. It did improve. I agree. It did improve. I just, you know, it just feels like nobody is actually helping each other on this team at any point in time. It does feel more or less like a solo queue experience when you watch them, and they're good players on an individual level. But the communication just doesn't appear to be there. And I think Hanwha, I really hope they get it together because this league is going to be substantially worse with a shitty Hanwha Life roster, because it basically means that a bunch of these players that could be very serious upgrades to other rosters that could create other teams are just trapped in prison together on Hanwha Life Esports.
It's a power void. Like because of this team, it's like sucked a lot of the talent in.
It basically makes it because you know, maybe certain teams would be better with some of these players. That it would suck a lot if this team continues to be this bad. Hopefully they can get at least to a point where they are able to develop some synergy and, you know, maybe threaten for a top 3 position.
Yeah. So we've talked about the big picture stuff, I think, for this week. Some of the smaller stuff has been Live Sandbox looked really promising potentially when they were able to like beat Hanwha, right? And there were some upset wins, and Willer's smites were crazy against KT, and everyone got really hyped. But I think they looked a little bit out of sorts on their last series against Bro, looking a little bit indecisive. Brion also like looks good in the standings, but also very exposed this week. So in terms of like the weaker teams, like people were a little bit excited, like wow, they have 3 wins
in week 1. So we were waiting for that to, you know, for that to kind of snap back to reality, and Gen.G dumpstered them.
Yeah. So we did see those, like we hit the checkpoint of like, all right, like the Giga Chad dream is dead.
Effort is just tragically bad, by the way. I cannot get over how bad Effort is. How is he still a starting support player in LCK. He gets caught out. He makes incredibly ludicrous decisions that just cost his team objectives and the game at times. I feel really bad for his teammates.
He was unfortunately very weak on Nongshim, and
He was terrible last year.
Yeah, I would say arguably the reason why Nongshim's like collapse started last season, because he played so poorly that they had to bring in Peter, an unknown challengers player. And then like Peter like at first they like only trusted him to play Yuumi. They're like, this is still better than Effort though. And it's really sad because a few years ago, Effort was kind of like, whoa, this guy could be like top half of the LCK support. Like he looked pretty solid. His Nautilus was very good, and it seemed like it was almost Nautilus one trick-esque. But when he was on Live Sandbox in 2021, it's like, okay, maybe this guy could actually have some potential. But he has just fallen off really hard. And it's sad to me because this is an ex-T1 player who was, by some people, kind of hyped to be, maybe this is the successor to Wolf, like it could be him. And because of this, by the way, he has an insane amount of fans because he was on T1. Like, just because
Wait,
he like,
really?
yeah, he like touched this, he has a lot of fans. Whenever he plays, there's a lot of Effort fans. And clearly the guy, you know, has some smart ideas about the game because a lot of teams are still trusting him, and maybe he's looking better in scrims, but I feel bad for him because I'm like, man, you were like so close to greatness. You had all the right tools, you had all the right career path, and you dropped the ball a little bit here. And I feel bad just about the whole situation because it just feels like a missed potential for him. And now maybe he's just so upset with his own play, he's in depression or something. I don't know. He's just. I have seen him play since I have become an LCK commentator. I have seen him play 10 times better than he is playing now. I have seen it. It has happened. It did occur.
Maybe he's great in
There's
scrims.
proof. I don't know.
I just don't understand how this is allowed to continue.
It might not for much longer. I don't know. But anyway. So there's that. Kwangdong looked completely lost this week. And DRX didn't look better, to be honest. So like it feels like I'm like, okay, we got a top 3. Like just like checkpoint after week 2, we have
I don't know. I think it's hard to tell whether KT or Gen.G is better. Do you think it's clear?
I think Gen.G is significantly better than KT at this moment in time. Because I think I say because Cuz has been very inconsistent, I feel, and KT Rolster have shown some really poor decisions in the mid game. The top lane, where we're seeing Keen pop off, is like a really strong point for them, and kind of a surprise because Keen was really bad for most of last year. Just had an off year, looked really unhappy. Looked like he wanted to change, didn't want to be on the roster anymore, and then put him in a new environment. And it's like, in a weird way, he's the new Rascal. Like, he plays like Rascal did for KT last year, and like that's a really strong point for them. But I think overall the synergy and the communication for Gen.G has been much better, even with Pays like soft inting by accident sometimes.
He doesn't. Pays dies in extremely stupid ways, which is very funny because he's a rookie. I mean, my favorite one was I was watching that game 1 that they played against Hanwha. And
I know this when he tries to clear the ward.
He's trying to clear a control ward in mid lane as Jin with no vision, and he knows his entire team just want to fight in bot side, and he's literally just standing there. And there's a Varus and Ashe on Hanwha, and he just gets hit by an Ashe arrow, then a Varus ult, and then he just dies because he was standing alone with no vision, slowly Jin autoing a control ward.
So
so there are definitely like Pays moments where I'm like, what the fuck, man? Like that was extremely stupid. But also he's very mechanically good. He frequently dominates his lane. He's been good in the team fights. Once you get some of those idiot moments out of his system, I think he's going to be a very good player. I mean, already is a good player.
In team fights, he's incredible, right? Like that's the thing that he's super famous for. And he had some like cool Jin sniper shots or whatever, but you know, that's not as exciting to me as like some of his really good positioning and outplays on Zeri and stuff like that in team fights. But yeah, I think we have obviously a top 2 maybe you disagree with me on this, but I think we have like a top 3 as well with Gen.G, and then I'd say with Hanwha's slight resurgence, maybe they could contest with KT for 4th, and then we have like 5th is just all of the rest of the LCK. Like, who knows?
Well,
It's just
we'll disagree
it's
that
just so
Hanwha,
messy.
after I watched Hanwha and KT play and Hanwha get absolutely put in the dumpster this week, that I think that they're going to be close to KT in the future. I hope they will be. By the end of the split, I hope they will be.
Yeah. I know you had to do this show, so you didn't get to see games 2 and 3 of the Gen.G series yet,
Right.
but I recommend watching them. That's what kind of made me feel like, okay, maybe there's hope. So
yeah, no, I obviously there's too much talent on that team. Like, they definitely, if they're all on the right day, we know that they can go toe to toe with anybody in this league. It's just been that they haven't actually reached that state yet. So whatever it takes to get them there, we'll have to wait and see. Yeah, and I think it is disappointing that both DRX and Hanwha have been really bad, because they should at least be contending for the middle of the pack and like trying to be relevant and challenging playoff teams to some of the other rosters, but it just hasn't happened.
yeah,
I mean, DRX is just super depressing, because if you look at this roster, you say, "Oh, Rascal, wow, he was great on KT last year." You know, Kraka, oh yeah, he's kind of insane, but he was one of the good parts of Live Sandbox. Fate, okay, Fate's bad, but Dokdom was fine on Dom 1, and Beryl, who is constantly creative and maybe not the most mechanically gifted support, but one of the best shot callers in the world. You would look at this roster and say, surely this is they'll be in the running for playoffs. They should make playoffs. They've just been dreadful.
yeah. I think part of the synergy problems we talk about with a lot of these teams in the first few weeks of spring, just they need time. But I mean, they won today, and Fate put the team on his back in that second game, and like actually just repeatedly dropped waves and dove bottom with Barrel's weird Caitlyn support, which he didn't seem happy. Like, Fate seemed very upset about it. And he picked up POG and almost looked like he was about to refuse to do the interview when he was called up, because both of the players who got POG, I don't even remember who got it in game 1, but both the players looked like they did not. I think it was Rascal, actually, thinking back on it, but both the players looked like they did not want to do the interview. They looked very upset, even though they won, because it was one of those series where, like, I mean, Kwangdong is pretty bad, and we like almost lost to them in game 1, and this is like clearly like we're not living up to our standards. I think the whole team is kind of down on themselves right now because they haven't lived up to those fan expectations, everything you were just talking about with how this roster is built. So I hope things get better. There's a lot of teams I hope things get better for, because Nongshim was like the canary in the coal mine last season for like, oh yeah, you can put all these good players together, but you can't make them win. And I don't want to have multiple Nongshims this season, and I'm worried that like if things don't turn around for some of these teams, we might, and it might be very sad, and we might actually see like roster shakeups before summer. Like, that never happens, where contracts are ended early and you see like shakeups between seasons or player trades. That's like extremely rare in League of Legends, especially in the LCK.
Well, especially in the LCK. I
Yeah,
think that's the big problem. Like, there actually is probably a way to shuffle players on these rosters to make a lot of like net positive, like a lot of rosters pretty substantially better. Um, but the teams just don't seem willing to do that. LCK teams in particular are like allergic to making shifts between spring and summer, which I don't really understand, because the way that League of Legends works, when you create a roster as a GM, you don't know what the next season, what the patch is going to look like, what the overall shape of the meta is going to be, because there's so many changes that are happening. You have to sign your roster before you ever watch players play games on the new season. So for me, the big test of GMs and teams is to make adjustments to the roster between spring and summer once they actually have that information, and we just never see that in
yeah.
LCK.
This season feels like it. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen, but it feels like the first time in a long time where maybe it should happen, even if it doesn't. Because if these teams can't figure it out, like, are we going to watch a team like DRX,
I mean,
like go like
let's
2-16 and then play together again and have go at 2-16 seasons or something? Like, I don't want that. Nobody wants that.
I think, I mean, I think it could have happened last year. Obviously, there's not a world where Keen could not have been on Live Sandbox come summer, right? Like that, there were very clear ways that you could think to upgrade certain rosters that just didn't happen.
Yeah, could have put Dove in a different mid lane, a different team
Apparently
that
that was
needed
the
help.
move. Who would have known?
Yeah, then just put a top laner in that spot. Yeah, I mean there were ways for sure. But I just I love the top of our LCK right now, but the rest of it has been messy this season. And every time I talk to the other cast about this, like, well, if it's spring season, this always happens. I'm like, yeah, but this time it like really happened. Like it's really like we have like 1/5 of our games are quality. Like 1/5 of our games are like the quality that the LCK puts out, right? Like I'm being obviously very sarcastic and being very exaggeratory on this, but it does feel like I'm showing up for work. I'm like, is it going to be another one of these games? You know, like give me the good ones, please. And this is like after LCK has 3 teams in top 4. We're getting all of these new viewers. Like, oh, that region I heard it's pretty fucking hype. Like they are the best players in the world. And they're like, how about this DRX team over there? This Kwangdong team, man. They just don't seem like they're on the same page. I think this team could be a bottom team in the LEC. I don't know. I'm like, no, I promise we're good. Just give us some time. I hope the improvement is there because we need it.
It does feel like a trap when the team with the most world champions on it is just terrible, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because people do come in the chat. I see this every time. Like isn't this the team that won Worlds? Why are they so terrible? I'm
Three
like,
world champions on this roster. Oh yeah, oh god, I'm looking at that. It's like, hey, isn't that Beryl? Like he's won 2 out of the last 3 worlds on 2 different rosters. Oh god, like oh shit, like I can't watch this.
It seems like a scam right now. Honestly, it seems like a scam. It's like, wait, T1 didn't win Worlds. Like clearly, this is the best team, and Dplus Keria wasn't even in the finals. Like this doesn't make sense. It's a scam. I'm getting duped.
To be fair, we are glad that DRX didn't run back that roster because it wouldn't have been good.
No, that was the right call. Just this new one hasn't worked yet. So
it better work, man. It better work. Nobody wants to go through this whole year because I just don't think, as much as I have been enjoying KT's play recently, I just don't think that this group of players has a particularly high ceiling on KT. Like it's really hard to look at this roster and be like, yeah, these guys are, top. Are there any players that we would argue on KT are top 3 at their position in the world? Maybe Keen if he gets back into form. Maybe
that's the only one where you're like maybe. And aiming, if he was on a better team and had more support, like he could be. Like I think aiming could be with the right tools around him. But is he right now? No.
He's very good. It's not to say that KT doesn't have very good players. It's just like, how do you contest teams like T1 that have Zeus and Keria? Like these are arguably the best players in their position in the world. Or you look at Dplus and like, oh shit, like Deft. Is Deft the best AD carry in the world right now? Maybe.
I think so.
That's an argument. Ruler's been doing really well in China. Viper hasn't looked like himself so far, so I would say probably Deft and Ruler are the top 2 as we have right now. Canyon is, I think, clearly the best jungler in the world. So it's tough. It's tough to look at KT and be like, yes, this is the team that is going to topple the Titans. Whereas Hanwha, maybe there's a shot. Maybe there's that chance, right?
Gotta keep praying, Monty.
Yeah, or even like Chovy, right? Mid lane. Chovy's been doing pretty well. And we haven't talked about Gen.G a lot, but they're back on their old bullshit. And I think the best part about
so true.
What do you mean?
I just mean like in a way, like I was actually talking about this with the other casters just off the show during a break. Like it feels like it's 2021 Gen.G again, where they're like out there, they got a lead, but like maybe kind of choking it away, might mess it up. Ruler's gonna get caught, except it's Pays now. I'm like, Pays gonna get caught, like he's out there, like he's up on their own bullshit. Like I was like, no, I feel that. Like
what I will say is that Gen.G, in terms of their macro game, has changed very little from last year. They still are. We're going to have excellent lane assignments. We are going to collect every last red cent of gold on the map. We are going to get all of the farm. We will have control over the side waves. We will create immense pressure on the map. They still have those same stranglehold tactics, and it is fun to watch. I mean, their macro is still good. besides Pays randomly dying, which I think will be fixed. But for the most part, they can just tell Pays where to go, and it's not that different, right? It's not that different.
Yeah. I think there have been some decision-making problems in terms of objective setup and stuff like that, but they've only really been like exposed by T1, and otherwise it's been kind of easy so far.
It was
They
also
do
their
play,
first game of the season with a brand new roster.
and they do play against Dplus Kia this week. So that, or this coming week, of course, and that is going to be a big test for them, and it's going to be probably the best match of the week. So
Yeah, it's
that's
on
going to be a really
Wednesday.
fun one. Yeah, starting
On
the week
Wednesday.
off.
So as far as you guys are concerned, you can watch it live. You're casting that one, right, on Wednesday?
Yeah, I should be on Wednesday. Yeah.
Okay. And so I will be doing that on Bangers Only 100% on Wednesday morning. For you guys who don't watch it live, you can have that option. T1 versus Hanwha Life at least is hype on paper, so it's not so bad.
Yeah. It. Yeah.
Hanwha Life versus the teammates facing each other for the first time. Kingen and Zeka versus Beryl. I guess you got that. You got that hype. The matches this week not super amazing though.
Yeah, it's another week where we just try to see if we can build that synergy back. Can we?
Last
Can
week
we
was the
stop
good
scamming the
matches.
LCK fans?
I mean, this last week was the good matches. I mean, we got Hanwha versus KT, we got Hanwha versus Gen.G, T1 versus Dplus. I mean, these were all like premier on paper matches. So, yeah. Unfortunately, we don't get the one that I am going to be most curious about, which is KT versus Dplus for another couple weeks. But
Yeah, that one's going to be good though when it does happen.
At least we got some nice matches. So I think that'll. You have any final thoughts here, Wolf?
Not really. I think we did it.
got to talk. Got our most exciting match until it happens again, and then until the playoffs. It's just like the gem amongst the sea of, I won't say shit. It's more like dirt. The diamond in the rough. This Dplus versus T1 game, which to be fair is truly special, was an absolutely outstanding game. So lots to talk about that. Remember, guys, to follow on Twitch and subscribe on YouTube. Do all of the things. Really does help us out. You can look for more Last Free Nation content. Check us out on TikTok as well. There's a lot of clips from this show and other ones that are on there that are pretty funny. So be sure to look at that, Last Free Nation, on TikTok, Twitter, everything like that. Wherever you want it, we are there on social media. And Wolf and I will see you next week.